The year was 1809, in the rolling hills of Kentucky. A small wooden cabin stood alone among the towering trees. The forest was dense, wild, and untamed, its silence broken only by the whispers of the wind and the occasional rustle of an animal in the brush. Inside this humble cabin, a child was born, Abraham Lincoln. The son of Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, he entered the world surrounded by hardship. There were no soft beds, no warm blankets, no doctors, just wood, fire, and love. Thomas Lincoln, a strong man with rough hands, worked the land tirelessly. He chopped wood, plowed fields, and built fences, doing everything necessary to keep his family alive. Nancy Hanks, gentle and wise, tended the home. She cooked, cleaned, and protected her children from the hardships of life. Most importantly, she nurtured the mind of the small boy, planting the seeds of curiosity and knowledge. Even as a baby, Abraham was different. His eyes were deep, thoughtful, and observant. He watched the world around him with a quiet intensity, as if searching for something beyond the forest and the cabin walls. Night after night, Nancy would sit by the fire with young Abraham in her lap, a single candle flickering between them. "Read, Abraham," she whispered. "Learn everything you can. Knowledge will carry you farther than any farm, any fence, or any wealth. It is your strongest weapon." The boy listened, his tiny fingers tracing the letters in worn, borrowed books. This moment, small and quiet, would set the course for a life that would one day change a nation. Life was simple, but it was also brutally hard. Winters were bitter, and hunger often made its presence known. The family relied entirely on what they could grow, hunt, or trade. Abraham rose at dawn. His small hands helped his father in the fields. He chopped wood, hauled water, and learned the toughness of life firsthand. By evening, his body ached, but he still made time to read every night by the soft glow of a candle. Neighbors often laughed at him. "Why do you read so much, Abraham?" they would ask. "You'll never need these books, you're just a poor farmer's boy." Abraham never answered aloud. He simply smiled and returned to his reading. He understood something they did not. Life was bigger than the forest, bigger than the struggles, bigger than poverty. Nancy Hanks' lessons echoed in his mind. Always do what is right, always be honest, always be kind. These words were more than advice. They were a guidepost, shaping the boy's character in a way no hardship could break. As Abraham grew, his love for learning became insatiable. He read everything he could get his hands on, the Bible, old almanacs, and any book his neighbors would lend. Some days he would carry a book in one hand and an axe in the other, splitting wood as he muttered the letters he had memorized. His body grew strong, but it was his mind that set him apart. He noticed injustice, he questioned the world, and he dreamed of a life beyond the cabin and the fields. Despite the teasing from other boys, he remained steadfast. He had already made a silent pact with himself. Knowledge was power, honesty was strength, and one day he would make a difference. Even simple moments carried lessons. Nancy would show him how to plant crops, care for animals, or measure distances with simple tools. Through each lesson, Abraham learned patience, observation, and the importance of hard work. Then tragedy struck. By 1818, Abraham's mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, fell gravely ill. Her body weakened, her breath became shallow, and every day she grew closer to death. There was no doctor nearby. Medicines were scarce, almost non-existent. The family had only hope, faith, and each other. Abraham, now 9 years old, felt the weight of the world for the first time. He sat by his mother's bed, holding her hand, tears streaming down his small face. "Mom, please don't leave me," he whispered. Nancy smiled weakly, her eyes filled with love, pride, and sadness. "My son," she said softly, "always do what is right, even when no one is watching. Be honest, be kind, be brave. And remember, knowledge is your light in the dark." Abraham nodded, fighting back his sobs. Though he could not fully understand death, he understood her words. They would stay with him forever. Section 5, The Last Night. That night, the cabin was silent, except for the crackling fire and the soft whispers of the wind. Abraham held his mother's hand as she took her final breath. Her warmth faded, her voice silenced. For the boy, the world had changed. The person who had been his everything was gone. In the quiet darkness, Abraham made a silent vow. "I will make you proud, Mom. I will always do what is right, I promise." This promise, born from grief, would guide him through every challenge and every decision he would face in life. Months later, Thomas Lincoln married Sarah Bush Johnston, a kind, strong, and intelligent woman. At first, Abraham was hesitant. He missed his mother terribly and feared that no one could replace her. But Sarah saw the spark in the boy. She encouraged his learning, nurtured his curiosity, and protected the promise he had made in silence. Through her support, Abraham slowly healed. He continued to read, to dream, and to grow stronger every day. The boy who had lost his mother in a cold forest cabin began to understand resilience, courage, and hope. He began to see a path that could lead him to something far greater than survival, a life of purpose, honesty, and leadership. Even as a child, Abraham's mind wrestled with big questions. Why are some people poor and others rich? Why do some people have freedom while others do not? What does it mean to be honest, to be just, to be brave? These questions, nurtured by loss, poverty, and love, laid the foundation for the man he would become. The lessons of the forest, the candlelight, and the silent promise to his mother would echo in every choice he made. By the end of 1818, Abraham Lincoln was no longer just a boy. He was a boy with a mission, though he did not yet know the scope of it. The promise he made in that small Indiana cabin would one day guide a nation through its darkest hours. The year is 1819. Abraham Lincoln is now 10 years old, a boy with a heavy heart but an unyielding spirit. The Lincolns live on a small plot of land in Knob Creek, Indiana. The forest surrounds them, thick and untamed, stretching for miles. Life is hard, winters bite, summers scorch, the soil is stubborn, crops sometimes fail, and hunger lingers like a shadow in the cabin. Yet Abraham thrives in this harsh world, not in wealth, but in curiosity. Where other children see only work and hardship, he sees lessons. Every log split, every fence built, every trip to the river teaches him discipline, patience, and determination. By night, he returns to his candlelit studies. Books are scarce, everyone borrowed, passed down, or crafted from scraps of paper is treasured. He reads the Bible, the histories of kings and emperors, almanacs, and even a few stories of distant lands. Every page builds a mind that is thoughtful, questioning, and restless. Section 2: The Weight of Poverty. Though Abraham's mind expands, his body endures hardship. He wakes before dawn to feed the animals. He works the fields with his father, chopping wood, pulling weeds, plowing, hauling water. His clothes are patched repeatedly, shoes wear thin, hands blistered and scarred. Neighbors sometimes sneer. Why does Lincoln raid when he could work? Books won't fill your stomach, boy. Abraham does not argue. He knows the difference between immediate survival and lifelong strength. Knowledge, he realizes, is the weapon of the powerless, the light of the poor, the spark that could one day ignite change. Nancy's memory lives on in his mind. Always be honest, always be kind, knowledge is your light. Her absence sharpens his focus, making every lesson more urgent, every word more precious. By the age of 12, Abraham is nearly as tall as his father. Strength has grown alongside knowledge. Yet work is never-ending. The farm demands every hour, every ounce of energy. Evenings are consumed with study. By the dim glow of a candle or fireplace, he practices reading and writing. He copies passages from the Bible. He writes letters to imaginary friends, crafting his understanding of the world. Sarah Lincoln, his stepmother, observes with quiet pride. She encourages him, protecting his study time despite the demands of the farm. Books will take you farther than an axe or plow, she says. Abraham nods silently, committing every word to memory. Even while splitting wood or plowing fields, he hums lines from the Bible, the histories, the poems he loves. His mind is never idle, it is always learning, always questioning. Around age 13, Abraham notices injustice more clearly. One day, while walking to a neighbor's cabin to borrow a book, he sees a group of boys teasing a younger child. "Stop," Abraham shouts. The other boys laugh, or what? Abraham steps forward. His frame is lean, but his voice is steady and unafraid. Or I'll tell the whole village, and you know it's wrong, he says. The teasing stops. The younger boy looks at Abraham with awe. Even at 13, the boy who lost his mother now embodies courage and fairness. This moment plants a seed. Abraham is learning that courage is not measured by strength, but by honesty and action. At 14, Abraham begins to collect scraps of paper and old books, wherever he can find them. He reads every night, often late into the dark hours. He teaches himself arithmetic, grammar, and history. He writes essays and reflections in crude handwriting, imagining himself speaking to audiences, debating, leading. He often dreams of a life beyond the forest. A life where words matter more than wood, where thought matters more than toil, where justice and honesty can change the world. Even the neighbors begin to notice. Lincoln reads more than he works, they whisper. He will never be a farmer. Abraham does not care. He knows that the world of ideas, of justice, of knowledge, is far greater than any forest cabin. While the memory of Nancy Hanks Lincoln remains the guiding force in his life, Sarah Bush Johnston becomes a source of stability and love. She encourages him to keep reading. She teaches him kindness, patience, and resilience. She reminds him that learning and labor can coexist. Abraham also begins helping his siblings, guiding younger children, and protecting them from dangers in the wilderness. The weight of responsibility, combined with his intellectual growth, forges a boy who is both practical and visionary. By 16, Abraham is respected in his community, not for wealth or status, but for wisdom, fairness, and courage. Abraham's teenage years are filled with small adventures and larger responsibilities. He ferries logs to the river. He splits rails for fences that stretch for miles. He carries letters and messages across the countryside. He walks miles to borrow books. Through every hardship, every challenge, he remembers the promise he made to his mother. I will always do what is right, I promise. This silent vow grows stronger with each passing year. It guides him when others mock him, when work is overwhelming, and when life seems impossible. By 18, Abraham has become a young man of thought and principle. He witnesses slavery in nearby towns and farms. He listens to debates and arguments. He feels the sting of injustice, the pain of inequality, and the unfairness that grips society. His mother's words echo louder than ever. Stand for what is right, even when no one is watching. These lessons shape not only his thoughts, but his future purpose. Abraham begins to realize that his life will not be just about survival. It will be about justice, truth, and courage, values that will define his legacy. By 1830, Abraham Lincoln is now 21 years old, a young man with a mind far beyond his years, shaped by poverty, loss, and love. He has survived the harshest winters, endured the hardest labor, and taught himself knowledge that many privileged men never receive. He has learned courage, honesty, and fairness in a world that often rewards neither. And he remembers the boy he once was in the candlelit cabin. He remembers Nancy Hanks Lincoln, her lessons, her love, and her promise. Abraham is ready to step beyond the forest, beyond poverty, and beyond fear. The world awaits a young man who has been forged by hardship, guided by love, and driven by a promise that will one day change the course of a nation. By 1830, Abraham Lincoln had grown into a young man, tall, lean, and thoughtful, carrying the lessons of his childhood like a lantern in the dark. The forests of Indiana were still his home, but his mind was no longer confined to the trees and fields. He had dreams, ambitions, and a burning sense of purpose that demanded more than a life of farming and toil. Abraham worked tirelessly on the farm, splitting wood, hauling water, plowing fields, and repairing fences, yet his nights were devoted to books. Candlelight flickered across his young face as he read the Bible, law books, and histories of faraway lands. He copied passages by hand, memorized lines of speeches, and practiced the art of speaking aloud, imagining himself debating in courts or standing before crowds of people. These quiet hours molded his intellect and sharpened his sense of justice. The world around him was harsh. Villagers mocked his ambition, saying he was too thin, too awkward, too poor, too much of a dreamer. Yet Abraham never wavered. He had faced loss at an early age and carried a promise that would guide every step he took. to be honest, kind, and courageous, and to stand for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. By 18, Abraham sought work beyond the family farm. He tried many small jobs, rail splitting, general labor, clerking at local stores, but none fully satisfied him. He observed injustice wherever he went, the treatment of workers, the suffering of the poor, and the cruelty inflicted on enslaved people in nearby regions. Each encounter deepened his moral convictions, fueling a desire to make a difference in the world. Around this time, he also discovered the law. Without formal schooling, Abraham began to teach himself the principles of justice and governance. He borrowed books whenever he could, studied court proceedings, and practiced arguments aloud, imagining himself in the roles of advocates, judges, and statesmen. His friends and neighbors were amazed at his knowledge and eloquence, noting that the once awkward farm boy spoke with the wisdom of a much older man. In 1832, Abraham took his first real step into politics, running for a seat in the Illinois General Assembly. It was a bold move for a young man from humble beginnings. He lost the election, but he did not see defeat as the end. Instead, he saw it as a lesson in perseverance, a test of character, and a challenge to grow stronger. He returned to work, studied harder, and began preparing for the opportunities that lay ahead. During these years, he also faced personal growth and heartbreak. He experienced young love, the complexities of relationships, and the realities of human disappointment. Each experience honed his empathy, teaching him how to understand and connect with people from all walks of life. He learned that leadership was not just about power or ambition. It was about listening, understanding, and standing firm in the face of criticism and adversity. By 1834, Abraham had grown into a man ready to take the next step. He won his first seat in the Illinois state legislature, entering the world of law and politics. His speeches were honest, grounded in principle, and deeply moral. He gained respect not for wealth or status, but for integrity, clarity, and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. He became known as a man who could stand before a crowd, examine the issues, and speak with a voice that demanded attention, not through arrogance, but through truth. Through all this, Abraham never forgot the lessons of his childhood, the mother who had died too soon, the cabin that had been his world, and the promise he made to her. Those memories gave him courage when others doubted him, strength when obstacles seemed insurmountable, and clarity when decisions were complicated by politics and human weakness. He learned to balance ambition with empathy, courage with humility, and intellect with morality, a combination that would define his entire life. By the end of this period, Abraham Lincoln was no longer just a boy from the forests of Indiana. He was a young man with vision, a sense of justice, and the early experience of public service that would prepare him for the enormous challenges ahead. Poverty, loss, and struggle had shaped him, but they had also forged a determination to rise, to fight for what was right, and to leave a mark on a world that had seemed, for so long, indifferent to a boy from the woods. He had endured hardship, embraced knowledge, and learned the laws of both the land and human nature. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but Abraham Lincoln now had the foundation, the skill, and the moral compass to navigate it. The boy who had lost his mother, who had studied by candlelight in a cold cabin, who had split wood, worked the fields, and faced ridicule. He was now a man ready to enter the political stage, ready to take the lessons of his life and use them to change the world. By 1846, Abraham Lincoln had grown from a self-taught young man into a force that could no longer be ignored. His mind, sharpened by years of toil, study, and reflection, now turned toward the larger world, the nation beyond Indiana, the laws that governed it, and the injustices that plagued it. Poverty and loss had shaped him, but so had courage, curiosity, and the promise he had made as a boy to his mother, to always do what is right. The nation itself was changing. The young United States, expanding westward, was grappling with questions of power, territory, and morality. The issue of slavery, long simmering beneath the surface, was growing more heated with each passing year. Abraham understood that the world he was entering would demand more than skill or knowledge. It would demand character, courage, and conviction. In 1846, Abraham Lincoln was elected to the United States Congress as a representative from Illinois. It was a moment of triumph for a man who had spent years in study, work, and small community politics. Yet the halls of power were intimidating, the debates fierce, and the stakes higher than anything he had faced. He listened carefully, learning the art of rhetoric, observing the behavior of politicians, and seeking the balance between compromise and principle. Lincoln was not a man of compromise when it came to morality. He spoke out against the expansion of slavery into new territories, condemning the idea that human beings could be treated as property. His speeches were measured but passionate, his arguments logical yet deeply emotional. He understood that words had the power to inspire, to persuade, and to ignite change. Yet politics was a world of setbacks and frustrations. Abraham lost opportunities, faced criticism, and encountered opposition from powerful men who doubted his abilities. mocked his background, or questioned his judgment. He learned that leadership required resilience, patience, and an unwavering commitment to principle. Each loss, each insult, each narrow defeat only strengthened his resolve. Meanwhile, his personal life flourished. He married Mary Todd, a woman of intelligence, spirit, and ambition. The union brought both joy and challenge. Mary encouraged Abraham to pursue his political dreams while navigating the complexities of public life. Their partnership was a meeting of minds as well as hearts, and together they raised a family while the demands of a growing political career pressed upon them. By the 1850s, Abraham Lincoln had become a prominent figure in Illinois. His legal practice thrived, his reputation for honesty and fairness spread, and his speeches attracted attention. He debated tirelessly, defended the weak, and challenged the powerful. Yet, despite recognition at home, he was not yet a national figure. The United States, on the brink of division, had no idea that a man from a humble Indiana cabin would one day shape its destiny. The Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858 catapulted him onto the national stage. Facing Stephen A. Douglas, a seasoned politician, Lincoln spoke eloquently on the issues that mattered most: freedom, equality, and the moral responsibility of a nation to uphold justice. He argued not with anger or bitterness, but with reason, clarity, and moral authority. Every speech, every word, every pause was a lesson in leadership, a testament to the man shaped by loss, struggle, and the silent promise to his mother. By 1860, the Republican Party nominated Abraham Lincoln as its candidate for president. The campaign was grueling, the opposition fierce, and the nation tense. The country was divided, the threat of secession looming, and the weight of history pressing down on a man who had spent his life learning, striving, and preparing. Through it all, Lincoln remained grounded. He remembered the forest cabin, the candlelight, the mother who had instilled in him the belief that knowledge, honesty, and courage were the greatest powers a man could possess. He remembered his stepmother, his early hardships, and the lessons of resilience, patience, and integrity that had carried him from poverty to prominence. When the votes were counted, Abraham Lincoln won. From a small boy in a forest cabin to the President of the United States, he had fulfilled a journey few could have imagined. Yet he knew that the real trials were only beginning. The nation was fractured, the people divided, and the shadow of civil war was growing longer with each passing day. Lincoln's presidency would not be a time of comfort, but of challenge. His early years in politics had prepared him for compromise, debate, and strategy, but nothing could fully prepare him for the moral and emotional burdens that lay ahead. The lessons of his childhood, hardship, loss, honesty, and courage, would be tested in ways no one could foresee. As he prepared to take the oath of office, Abraham Lincoln reflected quietly on the promise that had guided him all these years. The boy who had read by candlelight, who had split wood in the cold Indiana winters, who had mourned his mother in silence, was now entrusted with the leadership of a nation. Every decision, every action, every word would carry the weight of history. He whispered to himself, almost as if speaking to the mother he had lost, "I will do what is right, always, I promise." And with that promise, Abraham Lincoln stepped forward to face the storm that would test the United States as never before, prepared to lead with integrity, wisdom, and courage, the very values instilled in him in a small cabin in Indiana. The year is 1861, and Abraham Lincoln has just taken office as the 16th President of the United States. The nation he now leads is fractured, trembling on the edge of destruction. 11 southern states have declared secession, forming the Confederacy. Families are divided, communities are torn apart, and the shadow of war stretches across the land. Lincoln understands the enormity of the challenge before him. He is no longer the boy who split rails in the forests of Indiana. He is the leader of a nation in peril. From the moment he enters the White House, Lincoln faces relentless pressure. Military leaders argue, politicians criticize, and the people demand action. Yet despite the chaos, he holds steadfast to the principles instilled in him as a child: honesty, integrity, courage, and the moral obligation to do what is right. The lessons of his mother, Nancy, echo in his mind with every decision he must make. Stand for what is right, even when no one is watching. April 12, 1861. The first shots of the Civil War are fired at Fort Sumter. The nation reels. Thousands of young men march into battle, their faces filled with fear, patriotism, and uncertainty. Abraham Lincoln writes letters, meets with generals, and plans strategies. Every decision he makes could mean life or death for thousands of soldiers and civilians alike. The weight of the presidency presses down on him like never before, yet he carries it with the quiet strength of a man who has faced loss and hardship before. The war is brutal and unrelenting. Casualties mount. Every letter that arrives bears news of death, suffering, or despair. Lincoln spends nights packing the floor of the White House, reviewing reports, considering strategies, and thinking of the future of the country. He is determined to preserve the Union, yet he knows that victory cannot be achieved at the expense of justice and humanity. the issue of slavery, the moral stain on the nation, cannot be ignored. By 1862, Lincoln recognizes that the war must also be a war for freedom. He carefully considers the implications of emancipation, understanding the political risk, the backlash, and the danger to the fragile Union. Yet the principle is clear: slavery must end. In September 1862, he drafts the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory are free. It is a bold and dangerous move. Critics attack him. Allies doubt him. The nation is tense with anticipation and fear. Despite the criticism, Lincoln signs the proclamation. The words of his mother, the promise he made as a boy, and the moral compass he has followed guide him. What is right is sometimes difficult, sometimes dangerous, but always necessary. The document is more than policy. It is a statement of justice, a declaration of humanity, and a message that the nation must strive to live up to its ideals. Lincoln faces personal sorrow even amidst public duty. The constant stress of leadership, the weight of war, and the threats that surround him take a toll on his health. Yet he remains steadfast. He walks alone in the gardens of the White House at night, reflecting on the boy he once was in the Indiana cabin, the mother who taught him courage, and the promise that has guided him all these years. Every challenge he faces is measured against the standards set long ago by a mother's love and a boy's vow. Public speeches, letters, and proclamations fill the nation with hope. Lincoln addresses the moral dimensions of the war with eloquence and clarity. His words inspire soldiers, encourage citizens, and lay the foundation for the country's future. A house divided against itself cannot stand, he tells the nation. The meaning of these words is not just political, it is deeply personal. Lincoln sees the country as a family torn apart, in need of healing, unity, and justice. Even in the darkest moments of war, Abraham Lincoln demonstrates empathy and compassion. He listens to soldiers' stories, meets families affected by loss, and writes letters to those grieving. His humanity strengthens his leadership, ensuring that his decisions, while strategic, are grounded in morality. Every victory and every loss is weighed not merely in military terms, but in terms of human cost and the promise of justice for all. By 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation takes effect. Millions of enslaved men and women are declared free. The moral course of the nation shifts. Lincoln's vision begins to materialize, a vision rooted in the ideals of justice, equality, and humanity. Yet the war continues. The nation's survival and the fulfillment of the promise Lincoln has carried since childhood remain uncertain. Through it all, Lincoln's leadership is defined not by ambition or power, but by the courage to act, the wisdom to deliberate, and the moral clarity that has guided him from the forests of Indiana to the halls of the White House. He embodies the promise of a boy who lost his mother, a man who studied by candlelight, and a leader willing to shoulder the burden of a nation at war. The Civil War rages on, but the foundations for freedom, unity, and justice are being laid. Abraham Lincoln's courage and moral resolve, born of hardship, education, and loss, shine as a beacon in a nation in turmoil. The boy who once vowed to honor his mother's teachings now stands as the man who will lead the country toward the promise of freedom and equality, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. By 1863, the United States is engulfed in the most devastating conflict it has ever faced. The Civil War rages across towns, fields, and rivers, leaving destruction in its wake. Families are torn apart, young men march into battle, and the nation's soul hangs in the balance. Abraham Lincoln, the boy from a small Indiana cabin who grew up reading by candlelight and splitting rails, now carries the weight of every life, every hope, and every moral question the war presents. Lincoln rises each day before dawn, moving through the White House with deliberate purpose. He pores over military reports, correspondence from generals, and pleas from citizens. Every decision, where troops will march, which generals will lead, when to engage the enemy, could mean life or death for thousands. Yet Lincoln approaches each choice with calm resolve, guided by the principles that have shaped him: honesty, justice, and moral courage. The pressures of leadership are relentless. He meets with generals, many of whom are arrogant, inexperienced, or politically motivated. He argues, persuades, and sometimes scolds, knowing that the success of the Union depends not on his authority alone, but on the competence and courage of those who serve. He listens to advice, but never compromises the core values he has carried since childhood. Amidst the chaos of war, Lincoln continues to advocate for the Emancipation Proclamation, believing deeply that the fight for the Union is inseparable from the fight for freedom. His words inspire soldiers and citizens alike, giving meaning to the bloodshed and sacrifice. The nation's survival, he reflects privately, demands that we do not merely preserve it, but transform it to reflect the principles of justice and equality we claim to uphold. In November 1863, Lincoln delivers the Gettysburg Address, a speech of profound brevity and immense power. In just a few sentences, he honors the fallen, reaffirms the purpose of the Union, and reminds the living of the nation's moral obligation: a government of the people, by the people, for the people. The speech, though short, resonates across the country. It crystallizes his vision for a nation reborn from the ashes of war, united in freedom and equality. The weight of the presidency, however, is not merely political. Lincoln is a husband and father. The war's toll on his family is immense. He worries for Mary, who lives with anxiety and grief over the country's suffering. He grieves the loss of young sons and empathizes with families across the nation who will never see their children return. These personal sorrows deepen his empathy, strengthen his resolve, and remind him that leadership is inseparable from humanity. Lincoln faces criticism from all sides. Radical abolitionists demand faster action. Conservative politicians resist change. Military defeats shake the public's confidence, and newspapers question his judgment. Yet Lincoln's responses are measured, thoughtful, and unwavering. He understands that true leadership is the ability to hold fast in the storm while guiding others toward a moral and strategic vision. Despite these pressures, Lincoln remains introspective. He walks alone at night through the White House gardens, reflecting on the boy he once was, the boy who lost his mother, read by candlelight, and made a promise to live with integrity. That promise now guides every action, every decision, every speech. He recognizes that his role is larger than personal ambition. It is to preserve the Union, end slavery, and ensure that America lives up to its highest ideals. Through battles won and lost, through letters written and speeches delivered, Lincoln's leadership shapes the course of the war. He balances the brutal necessities of strategy with the moral imperatives of freedom and justice. Every decision weighs heavily on him, yet he carries it with a quiet determination that inspires those around him. By early 1865, the tide of the war begins to turn in favor of the Union. Lincoln's patience, moral clarity, and steadfast leadership are proving effective. He knows, however, that victory comes at a tremendous cost. Thousands have died, cities have been destroyed, and the nation remains fragile. Yet the principles he has upheld, justice, equality, honesty, and courage, have begun to take root in the hearts of the people. Lincoln's ability to unite vision and action, intellect and morality, defines his presidency. He exemplifies a rare form of leadership, one born from loss, hardship, and lifelong self-education. The boy from Indiana, who once promised his mother to live with integrity, now guides a nation through its darkest hours, making decisions that will echo for generations. As the war nears its conclusion, Lincoln prepares for the monumental tasks ahead, reconciling a divided nation, ensuring freedom for millions, and preserving the principles of democracy. The lessons of his life, childhood struggle, moral courage, empathy, and determination continue to guide him. Every challenge faced, every hardship endured, every sacrifice made, is a step toward fulfilling the promise he made decades ago in a small cabin, by candlelight, to a mother he would never forget. Abraham Lincoln's leadership during these critical years cements his legacy. A man who faces immense adversity with intelligence, courage, and unwavering moral vision, transforming the United States not just politically, but morally, ethically, and spiritually. He has become the embodiment of a nation's hope, the voice of its conscience, and the symbol of its resilience. By 1864, the Civil War had stretched into a long, brutal struggle. The nation was weary, its people battered by loss, fear, and uncertainty. Abraham Lincoln, the boy from Indiana who had once read by candlelight and split rails in the forest, now faced the heaviest burdens any leader could endure. Every decision carried the weight of thousands of lives, the fate of the Union, and the moral compass of a nation. The battles raged across the fields of Virginia, Georgia, and Tennessee. Reports arrived daily of death, suffering, and destruction. Lincoln studied each report meticulously, analyzing strategies, advising generals, and weighing the potential human cost of every maneuver. He knew that war was not only fought with guns and armies, but also with wisdom, patience, and unyielding moral resolve. Even as the country struggled, Lincoln remained a symbol of hope. His speeches inspired soldiers and civilians alike. He wrote letters to grieving families, consoling parents who had lost sons, wives who had lost husbands, and children who had lost fathers. His empathy and understanding of human suffering set him apart from leaders who saw war only through the lens of politics or strategy. In the spring of 1864, Lincoln faced one of the most critical decisions of his presidency, the appointment of the Union's military leaders. Generals clashed with each other and with the administration, their egos threatening the cohesion of the army. Lincoln carefully weighed each choice, understanding that the right commander could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Patience, observation, and moral judgment guided him, ensuring that each decision served not only strategic ends, but ethical ones as well. As the months passed, the Union began to gain ground. Key victories at Atlanta, Nashville, and other battlefields brought renewed hope. Yet Lincoln knew that victory was fragile. The country was deeply divided, and the work of healing and uniting the nation had only just begun. He spent hours reflecting on the future, planning for reconstruction, and considering the delicate balance between justice and reconciliation. Amidst these responsibilities, Lincoln faced personal sorrow. The pressures of leadership, the grief of loss, and the constant stress took a toll on his health. Mary Todd Lincoln struggled with anxiety and fear, her worries reflecting the anguish of a nation under siege. Yet through it all, Lincoln remained steadfast, his focus unbroken, his resolve strengthened by the principles instilled in him since childhood. The winter of 1864-1865 brought both challenges and hope. Lincoln worked tirelessly to prepare the nation for the end of the war. He met with legislators, planned strategies for Reconstruction, and sought to ensure that the principles of freedom and equality were preserved. Every step he took was guided by his enduring commitment to morality, justice, and the promise he had made to his mother decades earlier, to always do what is right. In early 1865, as the Union forces pressed deeper into Confederate territory, Lincoln reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. From a boy in a forest cabin to the president of a nation at war, he had faced loss, poverty, ridicule, and overwhelming responsibility. Yet through it all, he had remained true to his principles, his promise, and his vision for a united, free, and just country. By April 1865, victory was within reach. Confederate forces were surrendering, and the dream of a reunited nation was becoming reality. Lincoln planned for the delicate work of Reconstruction, knowing that the next chapter would require wisdom, patience, and moral clarity. He thought of the millions of enslaved people who would now live in freedom, and he contemplated the immense task of rebuilding not just the country's infrastructure, but its conscience. Even in these final days, Lincoln remained humble, introspective, and deeply human. He walked the White House halls at night, recalling the boy he once was, the boy who lost his mother, read by candlelight, and split wood in the forests of Indiana. That boy's promise still guided him, shaping decisions, inspiring speeches, and grounding a leader in the principles of honesty, justice, and courage. Abraham Lincoln's leadership during these final battles was marked not by personal glory, but by a steadfast commitment to the nation's moral and political survival. He embodied resilience, wisdom, and empathy, carrying the hopes of a country on his shoulders while remaining true to the values that had defined him since childhood. As the nation edged toward peace, Lincoln's vision of freedom, equality, and unity stood as a beacon, ensuring that the sacrifices of war would not be in vain. The boy from Indiana had become the man who would guide America through its darkest hours, leaving a legacy that would endure far beyond the battlefield. By April 1865, the long nightmare of civil war was finally drawing to a close. The Union armies had triumphed. Confederate forces had surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, and the nation, though scarred and weary, stood on the threshold of unity. Abraham Lincoln, the boy from a small Indiana cabin who had once read by candlelight, now stood as the living embodiment of perseverance, wisdom, and moral leadership. The city of Washington buzzed with cautious optimism. Soldiers returned from battle, families were reunited, and the country breathed a collective sigh of relief. Lincoln, however, remained focused, knowing that the end of war did not mean the end of challenges. Reconstruction awaited. The nation needed healing, reconciliation, and guidance to navigate the fragile path ahead. The principles he had carried throughout his life, honesty, justice, and courage, would be tested once more. Lincoln moved swiftly to ensure that the ideals for which so many had died would endure. Freedmen were granted new rights, former Confederate states were gradually reintegrated, and policies were put in place to secure equality under the law. He met with legislators, local leaders, and ordinary citizens, balancing compassion with pragmatism, vision with political reality. Every decision reflected decades of personal experience, the lessons of loss, hardship, and moral resolve. Despite these monumental tasks, Lincoln remained humble and deeply human. He walked the streets of Washington, observing the people, listening to their stories, and reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought him here. He remembered the forests of Indiana, the cabin where he had first learned the power of knowledge, and the mother whose early lessons had shaped his conscience. That silent promise he had made as a boy, always to do what is right, remained the guiding light of his presidency. On April 9, 1865, the war's final chapters were written. The Union had been preserved, slavery was abolished. Lincoln's leadership, forged through years of struggle and loss, had reshaped the nation. Yet even in triumph, he carried the weight of sorrow, the lives lost, the destruction endured, and the long, painful path still ahead. He knew that peace required wisdom as much as courage, patience as much as vision. Lincoln's final days were spent planning for a stronger, united nation. He envisioned schools, legal reforms, and policies that would ensure freedom, equality, and opportunity for all. He corresponded with leaders, encouraged citizens, and reflected on the immense responsibility of preserving both the Union and the moral foundation upon which it rested. Yet tragedy struck in the shadow of victory. On the evening of April 14, 1865, while attending a performance at Ford's Theatre, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. the nation was stunned. The man who had carried it through war preserved it from division, and envisioned its rebirth was gone in an instant. For those who knew him, Lincoln's life was a testament to the power of perseverance, morality, and quiet strength. The boy who lost his mother, read by candlelight, and labored in the Indiana forests, had become the man who carried a nation through its darkest hours. His leadership, empathy, and courage left a mark that would endure for generations. Even in death, Abraham Lincoln's legacy inspired the United States to strive toward the ideals he had championed: freedom, justice, and unity. The promise he had made as a child, to always do what is right, had guided a nation through chaos, conflict, and moral uncertainty. That promise, fulfilled in action and vision, became a beacon for the generations that followed. Abraham Lincoln's story, from humble beginnings to the pinnacle of leadership, stands as a reminder that integrity, courage, and moral conviction can shape not only an individual, but an entire nation. He remains a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of a promise kept. Abraham Lincoln's life, from a small cabin in Indiana to the White House, is a journey defined by struggle, courage, and unwavering moral conviction. The boy who read by candlelight, split rails in the forests, and promised his mother to always do what is right, left behind a legacy that reshaped a nation and inspired the world. His presidency, forged in the crucible of the Civil War, preserved the Union at its darkest hour. Lincoln's leadership was not merely about strategy or politics. It was about guiding a nation through moral turmoil with empathy, intelligence, and integrity. Every decision, from issuing the Emancipation Proclamation to delivering the Gettysburg Address, reflected a deep understanding of justice and humanity. He showed that leadership is not measured by titles or power, but by the courage to do what is right, even when the world resists. Lincoln's assassination in April 1865 was a moment of profound national grief. The man who had carried a divided nation through war, who had envisioned a country free from the blight of slavery, and who had embodied the values of honesty, compassion, and perseverance, was gone. Yet even in death his influence endured. The principles he stood for, freedom, equality, unity, continued to shape policies, inspire leaders, and guide citizens. His legacy extends far beyond politics. Lincoln is remembered as a symbol of hope and resilience, a man who transformed personal hardship into moral strength. From a boy who faced poverty, the death of his mother, and countless obstacles, he rose to lead a nation with wisdom, empathy, and courage. His life teaches that adversity can forge greatness, that loss can inspire purpose, and that integrity is the foundation of true leadership. Even today, Abraham Lincoln remains an enduring figure in history. Schools, monuments, and speeches echo his words. His example inspires generations to pursue justice, act with honesty, and lead with compassion. He proved that one person's commitment to doing what is right can change the course of a nation, leaving an indelible mark on the world. The promise he made as a boy, "I will always do what is right," was fulfilled not through wealth, power, or fame, but through action, vision, and moral courage. Abraham Lincoln's life reminds us that leadership is defined not by circumstances, but by character, not by ease, but by perseverance, and not by ambition alone, but by the relentless pursuit of justice and truth. In the story of America, Abraham Lincoln is immortal, not because he lived without struggle, but because he faced it with unwavering resolve. He turned tragedy into purpose, knowledge into power, and integrity into legacy. The boy from Indiana who lost his mother, who labored in the forests, and who studied by candlelight, became the man who saved a nation, reshaped its conscience, and inspired the world. His life, fully realized, stands as a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of principle, and the enduring influence of one person committed to doing what is right. Abraham Lincoln's legacy is eternal, a beacon of hope, justice, and courage for all who follow. Thank you for watching Abraham Lincoln's incredible journey from a small cabin in Indiana to the White House. His story reminds us that courage, integrity, and perseverance can change the world. If you enjoyed this story and don't want to miss the next inspiring tale of a famous historical figure, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stay with us because the next story could be just as powerful, just as emotional, and just as unforgettable. Don't miss it.